Richard Hartwell snarled as Keisha Williams reached to refill his water glass at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The tech billionaire shoved her hand away roughly, causing water to splash across his mathematical equations scribbled on expensive napkins. "Look what you've done!" He stood up, towering over her. "This proof stumped MIT's finest for months." Hartwell held up the wet napkin, speaking loudly so other diners could hear. "Solve this. I'll give you everything I own." He laughed mockingly at his own words. Then he deliberately swept his arm across the table. Salt, pepper, and crystal glasses crashed to the marble floor in an explosive mess. "Now clean it up. That's what your people are good for." As Keisha knelt among the shattered glass, her brilliant mind absorbed every number from his soggy napkins. While he humiliated her publicly, she was quietly solving what he believed impossible. 3 blocks away from Le Bernardin, Lincoln Center's Avery Fisher Hall buzzed with anticipation. Tonight marked the 15th annual $1 Million Math Challenge, where America's wealthiest minds gathered to pose unsolvable problems to the world's brightest mathematicians. The rules were deceptively simple. Billionaire sponsors presented mathematical challenges that had stumped their research teams for months or years. Any contestant who solved a problem won the corresponding prize money. The twist? These weren't ordinary math problems. They were cutting-edge research questions worth millions in patents and breakthroughs. Richard Hartwell had never lost. In 15 years as head judge, his challenges remained undefeated. His reputation wasn't built on luck. The man had legitimately solved variations of Fermat's last theorem and built a tech empire on mathematical algorithms that revolutionized artificial intelligence. But tonight felt different. The stakes were higher than ever before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Sarah Carter announced from the podium, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "this year's total prize pool exceeds $50 million. The audience erupted in applause. "Our contestants include PhD mathematicians from Harvard, MIT, Cambridge, and Oxford." Cameras rolled as CNN prepared for their live global broadcast. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Mathematical genius was about to become prime-time entertainment for 300 million viewers worldwide. Back at Le Bernardin, Keisha Williams finished mopping up the mess Hartwell had created. Her manager, Giuseppe, grabbed her arm as she headed to the kitchen. "You stay invisible tonight," he hissed in her ear. "Those VIP guests decide whether this restaurant keeps its reputation. One wrong move and you're gone." Keisha nodded silently. She needed this job. Her grandmother's medical bills weren't paying themselves, and her student loans from MIT still haunted her credit score. 3 years ago, she'd been 1 semester away from her mathematics doctorate when financial reality crashed down. Her father's construction accident, her mother's diabetes medication, her younger brother's autism therapy costs. Numbers that added up to an impossible choice. MIT or family. She'd chosen family. Now she cleaned up after people who would never know she'd once published original research in topology theory. Her professors had called her work revolutionary. Her thesis advisor had predicted a Nobel Prize someday. None of that mattered when you couldn't afford tuition. Giuseppe disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving Keisha alone with the VIP section's dirty dishes and shattered dreams. But as she cleared tables, fragments of conversations drifted over from nearby diners. "Hartwell's challenge this year is supposed to be impossible," whispered a woman in diamonds. "Something about infinite sequences and convergence theory." "My husband's research team spent 2 years on it," replied her companion. "They're calling it the convergence paradox. No solution exists." Keisha's hands stilled on the wine glasses she was collecting. Convergence theory? She'd written her undergraduate thesis on convergence patterns in infinite series. Her mind automatically began working through potential approaches, muscle memory from years of mathematical training kicking in despite her current circumstances. More fragments reached her ears as she moved between tables. "The preliminary problems are just warm-ups," a man was explaining to his date. "Real challenge comes at the end. Hartwell always saves his impossible proof for last." "What makes him so confident nobody can solve it?" "Because he's Richard Hartwell. The man's never been wrong about mathematics, ever." Keisha felt something stir in her chest. Not anger exactly, more like recognition. She knew that feeling of absolute mathematical certainty, that moment when patterns clicked into place with undeniable clarity. She'd experienced it herself during late nights in MIT's library, solving problems that had stumped her professors. But she also knew something Hartwell apparently didn't. Mathematical brilliance didn't announce itself with degrees or bank accounts. It whispered in the minds of people others overlooked. And sometimes, just sometimes, those whispers contained truths that the loudest voices missed. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. The $1 Million Math Challenge was starting in 1 hour. Lincoln Center's doors were opening to the public for viewing parties in the lobby where giant screens would broadcast the competition live. Giuseppe emerged from the kitchen, scanning the dining room. "Williams, table 12 needs their check. Move!" As Keisha hurried to comply, her mathematical mind was already 3 steps ahead. She had exactly 43 minutes left on her shift. Lincoln Center was a 12-minute walk from the restaurant. The competition's preliminary round would begin in 55 minutes. Would she have the courage to step out of the shadows and into the light where her true abilities could shine? Keisha's hands trembled as she untied her apron in the restaurant's back alley. Her shift had ended 3 minutes ago. Lincoln Center's golden lights beckoned from just 12 blocks away, but each step felt like crossing an ocean. She wasn't supposed to be here. The $1 Million Math Challenge wasn't for people like her. People who served coffee instead of discovering theorems. People who counted tips instead of publishing papers. But Richard Hartwell's soggy napkin was folded in her pocket, his equations burned into her memory. She'd found his error within 30 seconds of studying the scribbled proof. The man who'd humiliated her had made a fundamental mistake that any decent mathematician should have caught. Lincoln Center's lobby was packed with curious onlookers watching giant screens broadcasting the competition. Keisha slipped through the crowd, her server's uniform drawing dismissive glances from well-dressed spectators. On screen, Dr. Sarah Carter was introducing the final 3 contestants: Dr. Marcus Webb from Harvard's Mathematics Department, Dr. Elena Kowalski from Oxford, and Dr. James Liu from MIT, her former classmate who'd finished the program she'd been forced to abandon. "Before we begin the final challenge," Dr. Carter announced, "Mr. Hartwell would like to address our global audience." The camera panned to Richard Hartwell, immaculate in his tailored suit, standing confidently at center stage. He held up a sheet of paper covered in complex equations. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the auditorium, "tonight I present the convergence paradox. My research team has spent 3 years developing this proof. It demonstrates that certain infinite sequences cannot converge under any known mathematical framework." The audience leaned forward. This was why they came, to witness mathematical history in the making. Hartwell's eyes gleamed with absolute certainty. "This proof has been verified by teams at Stanford, Caltech, and Princeton. It represents the absolute limit of human mathematical understanding." He paused for dramatic effect. "If anyone, and I mean anyone in this room, can find even the smallest error in this proof." The billionaire's voice grew louder, his arrogance filling every corner of the massive hall. "If anyone can solve this paradox that has stumped the world's greatest mathematical minds, I will personally write them a check for everything I own. My companies, my properties, my entire fortune, $50 billion. The audience gasped. Social media exploded. This wasn't just a mathematical challenge anymore. This was the bet of the century. Keisha felt her heart hammering against her ribs. In her pocket, Hartwell's napkin seemed to burn against her fingertips. She knew exactly where his proof failed. The error wasn't complex or subtle. It was embarrassingly basic, a sign convention mistake in the 7th equation that invalidated his entire framework, but she was nobody. A dropout, a waitress. Who would believe her? Dr. Carter stepped forward with legal documents. "Mr. Hartwell, this is highly unusual. Are you certain about this challenge?" "Absolutely," Hartwell declared. "I'm so confident in my proof that I'm willing to stake everything on it, because mathematics doesn't lie, Dr. Carter. And neither do I." The camera captured his smugness perfectly as he surveyed the stunned audience. 300 million viewers watched him place his signature on the legal guarantee. Lawyers scrambled to process the paperwork. This was no longer a competition. It was a public execution of mathematical pride. In the lobby, Keisha closed her eyes and made a choice that would change everything. She began pushing through the crowd toward the auditorium entrance. Security guards blocked her path. "Excuse me, miss. This area is for registered contestants and VIP guests only." Would a former MIT mathematics student have the courage to challenge the most arrogant man in America? "I said this area is restricted," the security guard repeated, his hand moving toward his radio. "You need to return to the public viewing area immediately." Keisha's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to speak with Dr. Carter. It's about mathematical proof." The guard laughed. "Lady, half the people here think they can solve million-dollar math problems. That's not how this works." "But Dr. Sarah Carter had noticed the commotion near the entrance. Something about the young woman's quiet confidence caught her attention. As head of Princeton's mathematics department, she'd learned to recognize genuine mathematical intuition. It rarely announced itself with arrogance. "What seems to be the problem?" Dr. Carter approached with curiosity rather than annoyance. Keisha pulled Hartwell's soggy napkin from her pocket. "There's an error in equation 7 of the convergence paradox. The sign convention switches from positive to negative iteration without justification." The auditorium fell silent. 300 million viewers watched through cameras as a woman in a server's uniform challenged the world's most confident mathematician. Dr. Carter examined the napkin, her eyebrows rising. These weren't random scribbles. The margins contained elegant derivations, shortcuts that most graduate students would miss. "Where did you study mathematics?" "MIT. 3 years of doctoral program before—" Keisha's voice trailed off. The reason didn't matter now. Hartwell's laughter boomed across the stage. "Security! Remove this delusional woman immediately. I don't have time for desperate people seeking attention." But Dr. Carter raised her hand. "Mr. Hartwell, she's identified a specific error. As competition director, I'm obligated to verify any mathematical challenge to your proof." "This is ridiculous," Hartwell snarled. "That woman was serving me coffee 2 hours ago. She probably can't balance a checkbook, let alone understand advanced mathematics." The crowd murmured with uncomfortable recognition. Many had seen her at Le Bernardin. The irony was delicious. The same person he'd humiliated was now questioning his mathematical supremacy. Dr. Carter walked to the giant display screen. "Miss Williams, Keisha Williams. Miss Williams, please explain your objection to equation 7. Keisha's hands shook as she approached the microphone. The auditorium stretched before her like an ocean of judgment. But mathematics had always been her safe harbor, the one place where truth mattered more than appearances. In equation 7, Mr. Hartwell assumes positive iteration when establishing the convergence boundary, she began, her voice growing stronger. But in step 12, he switches to negative iteration without adjusting the asymptotic behavior. She moved to the whiteboard beside the main screen, borrowed a marker, and began writing with fluid precision. If you're iterating positively, your limit approaches positive infinity along this trajectory. Her hand moved confidently across the board, sketching curves and mathematical symbols. But negative iteration creates a completely different convergence pattern. The limit actually approaches 2.847, not 0, as his proof claims. The 3 PhD contestants exchanged glances. Dr. Webb from Harvard grabbed his calculator, fingers flying across the keys. Dr. Kowalski from Oxford pulled out her laptop, running rapid calculations. Dr. Liu from MIT stared at the whiteboard with growing recognition. "She's right," Dr. Liu whispered, loud enough for his microphone to catch. "The asymptotic behavior completely changes with negative iteration." Dr. Carter quickly verified the calculation on her tablet. Her face showed surprise, then something approaching awe. "The correction is mathematically sound." Hartwell's face flushed red. "This is impossible. My team spent 3 years on this proof. We had it reviewed by experts at Stanford, Caltech, Princeton." "Sometimes," Keisha said quietly, "the most obvious errors are the hardest to see when you're too close to the problem." The auditorium erupted. Social media exploded with clips of the unknown waitress schooling a billionaire mathematician. #Waitress genius began trending worldwide within minutes. But Hartwell wasn't finished. "Anyone can point out arithmetic errors," he snapped. "That doesn't make her a mathematician. This was lucky at best." Dr. Carter studied her tablet screen where additional calculations were running. "Mr. Hartwell, this wasn't arithmetic. Miss Williams identified a fundamental conceptual error in convergence theory. Her correction opens an entirely new approach to infinite series analysis. The three PhD contestants were now huddled together, sketching variations of Keisha's correction on their scratch paper. What she'd revealed in 30 seconds was reshaping their understanding of problems they'd struggled with for years. Furthermore, Dr. Carter continued, her mathematical notation suggests advanced training. These techniques aren't taught at undergraduate level. Hartwell's confidence wavered for the first time in 15 years. My team will need to verify this independently. Of course, Dr. Carter agreed. But according to competition rules, any valid mathematical objection to the primary proof requires the challenger to proceed to the next level of difficulty. The audience held its breath. Keisha had passed the first test, but the real challenges were still ahead. Hartwell's eyes narrowed with renewed malice. Fine. If this woman thinks she's so clever, let's see how she handles problems that actually matter. Dr. Carter, present the secondary challenges. Miss Williams, Dr. Carter addressed her directly, are you prepared to compete in the formal competition? The next three problems increase in difficulty significantly. Keisha looked out at the sea of faces. Some showed curiosity, others skepticism, a few displayed outright hostility. But scattered throughout the audience, she saw something else. Hope. People who, like her, had been underestimated and overlooked were leaning forward in their seats. I'm ready, she said simply. But as Dr. Carter prepared the next challenge, Hartwell was already planning his revenge. This wasn't just about mathematics anymore. This was about destroying the woman who dared to make him look foolish in front of the entire world. Could a former MIT dropout survive what was coming next? Dr. Carter raised her hand to quiet the buzzing auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unprecedented situation. Miss Williams has successfully identified a fundamental error in tonight's primary challenge. The camera zoomed in on Keisha's face as she stood beside the whiteboard, marker still in her trembling hand. Her server's uniform looked absurdly out of place among the formal academic setting, but her mathematical work spoke louder than any credentials. According to competition rules, Dr. Carter continued, any challenger who identifies errors in preliminary proofs advances to the formal competition tier. Hartwell stepped forward, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Dr. Carter, I demand we verify her background first. This woman has no business competing against legitimate mathematicians. My business, Keisha said quietly into her microphone, is mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care about my uniform. The audience erupted in applause. Social media feeds exploded with clips of her response. Mathematics doesn't care about your uniform began trending alongside Waitress genius. But Hartwell wasn't backing down. Fine, if you want to play this game, let's raise the stakes. He gestured to his lawyers who were frantically typing on laptops in the front row. Dr. Carter, I'm formally modifying my challenge. Mr. Hartwell, that's highly irregular. I'm doubling my wager, Hartwell declared, his voice carrying across the silent hall. $100 billion. Everything I own, plus my company's combined assets. He pointed directly at Keisha. But now she has to solve 3 problems, not 1, and she gets only 60 minutes total. The auditorium gasped. The 3 PhD contestants looked stunned. This wasn't just mathematical competition anymore. This was financial warfare. Dr. Carter checked her tablet, scrolling through competition regulations. The rules do allow for modified challenges if all parties consent. I accept, Keisha said before Dr. Carter could finish. You don't understand what you're agreeing to, Dr. Webb from Harvard warned her. These aren't textbook problems. They're cutting-edge research questions that teams of mathematicians work on for years. But Keisha's eyes were fixed on Hartwell. She'd seen that look before, the absolute certainty that he was about to crush someone he considered beneath him. The same look he'd worn while grinding his shoe into her foot and calling her people contaminated. Furthermore, Hartwell continued, sensing victory, the competition will now be broadcast live to global news networks. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, everyone will watch this woman fail spectacularly. Dr. Carter looked concerned. Miss Williams, you're not obligated to accept these modifications. The original challenge stands if you prefer. No, Keisha said firmly. I accept his terms, all of them. The viewing audience had grown from 300 million to over 500 million as news of the unprecedented challenge spread worldwide. In Le Bernardin, Giuseppe and the kitchen staff were crowded around a tablet, watching their former waitress face down America's most arrogant billionaire. "Is she insane?" Giuseppe muttered. "That man will destroy her." But in nursing homes and community colleges, in night shift break rooms and single-parent apartments, people who'd been overlooked and underestimated were gathering around screens with growing hope. Dr. Carter announced the new rules. 3 problems, 60 minutes total. Miss Williams will work at the main board. The existing contestants will compete simultaneously for comparison purposes. And when she fails, Hartwell added with a cruel smile, I want her to admit publicly that she's nothing but a fraud seeking attention. I want her to apologize to every viewer for wasting their time. The cruelty of the demand hit the audience like a slap. Even his supporters seemed uncomfortable with the unnecessary humiliation clause. "And when will I succeed?" Keisha asked. Hartwell laughed. "You won't. But if I do?" His lawyers were frantically trying to signal him to stop, but his arrogance had taken complete control. "If you somehow solve all 3 problems, which is mathematically impossible, then yes, you get everything. $100 billion and a public apology from me." The contracts were hastily rewritten and signed, cameras positioned for optimal angles, social media platforms crashed under the viewing load as word spread globally. Dr. Carter approached Keisha privately during the setup. "Are you certain about this? There's no shame in competing under the original terms." "There's shame in staying silent when someone thinks they can humiliate you without consequences," Keisha replied. "I've been quiet too long." As technicians finished positioning cameras and microphones, Hartwell made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness the difference between real mathematical genius and desperate delusion. Watch carefully as this woman embarrasses herself in front of the entire world." But something had changed in Keisha's posture. The trembling hands were steady now. The uncertain voice had grown strong. She approached the massive whiteboard like a concert pianist approaching her instrument. The timer was set. The problems were sealed. 500 million people held their breath. Would the woman who cleaned up Hartwell's messes be able to clean up his mathematics as well? The 60-minute countdown began with a thunderous beep that echoed across Lincoln Center. Dr. Carter broke the seal on the first envelope, revealing Problem 1, Advanced Probability Theory with Quantum Applications. Keisha read the problem once, twice, then smiled slightly. The PhD contestants were already frantically scribbling equations, but she stood motionless for 30 seconds, absorbing the mathematical landscape in her mind. While Dr. Webb from Harvard struggled with the opening setup, Keisha identified an elegant shortcut. Instead of brute forcing through 17 variables, she recognized the problem as a disguised Markov chain. Her marker moved across the board with fluid precision, cutting through complexity like a knife through silk. The audience leaned forward. Even Hartwell looked surprised at her speed, but social media was brutal. Anonymous accounts flooded Twitter with attacks. "Fake waitress getting lucky. This is staged for views. She's probably getting answers through an earpiece." The hate was immediate and vicious. Meanwhile, Giuseppe from Le Bernardin was fielding phone calls from news outlets. "She was always strange," he told reporters, muttering numbers to herself, scribbling on napkins during breaks. "We thought she might be mentally unstable." Dr. Carter opened the second envelope. Problem 2, Topological manifolds and differential geometry. This was Keisha's specialty from MIT. She'd published undergraduate research on manifold theory that her professors had called revolutionary. Her approach was so unconventional that Dr. Kowalski from Oxford stopped her own work to watch. "She's using Riemann mapping in reverse," Dr. Liu whispered to his microphone. "That's actually brilliant." The cameras caught the amazement on the PhD contestants' faces. Here was someone thinking beyond their textbook approaches, finding pathways through mathematical landscapes they'd never considered. But Hartwell seized the moment for psychological warfare. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me share what I discovered about our challenger during the break." His voice dripped with manufactured concern. Miss Williams was expelled from MIT for academic misconduct. The lie hit Keisha like a physical blow. She stumbled, nearly dropping her marker. The audience murmured with uncertainty. Her mathematical momentum shattered. "That's not true," she said quietly, but her microphone barely picked it up. "My sources at MIT confirm it," Hartwell continued smoothly. "Plagiarism accusations. That's why she never finished her doctorate." In living rooms across America, viewers were switching between believing and doubting. The story felt too perfect, too much like a fairy tale. Surely waitresses couldn't solve problems that stumped PhD holders. "Doctor," Carter intervened with quiet authority. "Mr. Hartwell, unless you have documentation, such accusations are inappropriate." She approached Keisha's board, studying the work. "Miss Williams, your topological approach here is genuinely original. I've never seen this particular mapping technique." The validation steadied Keisha's nerves. Mathematics didn't lie even when people did, but the damage was spreading faster than her solutions. News outlets began running exclusive mystery mathematicians' troubled past headlines. Cable news shows hosted experts who questioned whether the entire event was staged for ratings. "Nobody jumps from serving coffee to solving research-level mathematics," declared a Yale professor on CNN. "The human brain doesn't work that way." 27 minutes remaining. The third problem was still sealed, 2 problems solved but barely. Keisha finished problem 2 with a flourish, her solution so elegant that the 3 PhD contestants applauded spontaneously. Even they recognized mathematical beauty when they saw it. Her work showed insights that graduate programs typically took years to develop. But Hartwell's legal team was working phones frantically. "We're getting reports that her solutions might be pre-programmed," one lawyer announced loudly enough for cameras to catch. "This level of speed suggests technological assistance or prior knowledge." Security guards began inspecting the stage area, checking for hidden devices. The implication was clear. No legitimate contestant could perform at this level without cheating. The pressure cooker was intensifying. Camera angles multiplied. The global audience had grown to 700 million people. Social media platforms were buckling under the traffic load. Hashmath Genius and Waitress fraud was trending simultaneously. Doctor. Carter opened the final envelope with ceremony. Problem 3, the infinite bridge paradox, Hartwell's personal masterpiece that had stumped research teams for years. Keisha read it once and felt something click into place in her mind. This wasn't just mathematics. This was 3 separate mathematical disciplines disguised as a single problem: number theory, topology, and convergence analysis, all woven together in a tapestry that looked impossible until you found the right perspective. But then disaster struck. Her calculator malfunctioned. The screen flickered and died, leaving her without computational support for the most complex calculations of her life. "Technical difficulties happen." Hartwell shrugged with false sympathy. "Perhaps we should postpone while we find her a working calculator?" The audience was fracturing into camps. Supporters chanted, "Let her work," while skeptics called for verification of her identity. The mathematical community was split between fascination and suspicion. "I don't need a calculator," Keisha announced, her voice carrying new strength. "Mathematics existed long before electronic computation." She turned to the massive whiteboard and began working purely from mental calculation. Her mind processed numbers with the same fluidity that concert pianists read complex musical scores. Viewers watched in amazement as she performed calculations that most people needed computers to verify. With 8 minutes remaining, Keisha's exhaustion was showing. The mental strain of solving research-level mathematics while enduring public character assassination had pushed her to her limits. Her handwriting grew shakier, her explanations less fluid. Hartwell sensed weakness. "This is what happens when desperation meets reality," he announced to the cameras. "Watch her collapse under pressure she was never qualified to handle." 7 minutes left, no calculator, global skepticism. Character assassination, physical exhaustion, the weight of 700 million people's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. But as Keisha stared at the infinite bridge paradox, something remarkable happened. All the noise faded away. The jeers, the cameras, the pressure, none of it mattered anymore. There was only mathematics. Pure, beautiful, undeniable mathematics. She saw the bridge that connected all 3 problems. She understood why Hartwell's teams had failed for years. They'd been trying to solve one impossible problem when they should have been solving 3 elegant ones. The solution required thinking beyond traditional frameworks. She needed to approach the problem not as a mathematician, but as an artist, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. Her marker began moving across the board with renewed energy. Not the frantic scribbling of someone under pressure, but the confident strokes of someone who had found her way home. 6 minutes remaining. Minutes. The final battle was about to begin. Could pure mathematical intuition triumph over computational power and institutional prejudice? 5 minutes remained when Dr. Carter received an urgent message on her tablet. She read it twice, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice cutting through the auditorium's tension. "I've just received communication from the International Mathematics Consortium. They need to make an immediate disclosure about tonight's competition." The camera zoomed in on her face as she continued reading. Hartwell looked annoyed by the interruption, but something in Dr. Carter's tone suggested this wasn't routine. "The infinite bridge paradox that Mr. Hartwell presented tonight." Dr. Carter paused, glancing at her tablet again. "According to documentation just submitted by MIT, Cambridge, and Princeton, this problem was designed specifically to be unsolvable using conventional mathematical approaches." A murmur rippled through the audience. The PhD contestants stopped their frantic calculations and looked up from their work. The problem was created as part of a research initiative to identify mathematicians who think beyond traditional frameworks. It requires what the consortium calls intuitive pattern synthesis, the ability to see mathematical relationships that pure computational analysis cannot detect. Hartwell's face went pale. This wasn't part of his plan. Dr. Carter continued. "Furthermore, the consortium reveals that Mr. Hartwell's own solution, developed over 3 years, relied heavily on quantum computing algorithms and AI-assisted pattern recognition. No human mathematician has ever solved this problem using manual calculation alone." The auditorium fell silent. 700 million viewers were witnessing the rules of engagement completely change. "This means," Dr. Carter said carefully, "that Miss Williams is attempting something that has never been accomplished in the history of modern mathematics. She's working without any computational assistance on a problem specifically designed to require technological augmentation." Hartwell stepped forward, panic creeping into his voice. "Dr. Carter, this disclosure is highly inappropriate. The competition parameters were clearly established. Actually, Mr. Hartwell, the consortium's letter indicates that you were aware of the problem's special classification when you selected it tonight. The question they're raising is whether it was ethical to present an unsolvable challenge without disclosure." The twist hit everyone simultaneously. Hartwell hadn't just been arrogant, he'd been deliberately setting up an impossible scenario. He'd chosen a problem that required technological assistance specifically because he knew no human could solve it manually. But Keisha Williams was still working at the whiteboard, completely absorbed in her calculations. She was 4 minutes away from attempting something that the world's mathematical establishment considered impossible. The global audience was no longer just watching a competition. They were witnessing a woman challenge the very limits of human mathematical capability. Had Hartwell's arrogance finally trapped him in a web of his own making? The revelation hit Keisha like a physical blow. She stopped mid-calculation, her marker frozen against the whiteboard. The problem she'd been confidently solving for the past hour wasn't just difficult. It was designed to be impossible for human minds to solve. No human has ever solved this manually. Dr. Carter's words echoed in her head like a death sentence. Around her, the PhD contestants had already given up. Dr. Webb from Harvard shook his head in defeat. "If it requires quantum computing, there's no point continuing." Dr. Kowalski from Oxford closed her notebook with resignation. Even Dr. Liu from MIT, who'd been supportive of Keisha's unconventional approaches, stepped away from his board. But the worst part was watching the global audience lose faith in real time. Social media sentiment shifted from curiosity to pity. She's been set up to fail. Hartwell planned this humiliation from the beginning. No one could solve an impossible problem. 3 minutes and 40 seconds remained on the countdown timer, but it might as well have been 0. How do you solve a problem that the world's greatest mathematical minds, assisted by the most powerful computers, considered beyond human capability? Keisha stared at her work on the whiteboard. All her calculations suddenly felt meaningless. She'd identified the three separate mathematical disciplines hidden within the paradox: number theory, topology, and convergence analysis. She'd found elegant connections between them. But if the problem required technological assistance that she didn't have, then all her insights were worthless. The auditorium was no longer silent with anticipation. It was silent with sympathy. 700 million people were watching her inevitable failure, and she could feel their pity radiating through the cameras. "Miss Williams," Dr. Carter approached gently. "Given this new information about the problem's classification, no one would fault you for stepping away. What you've accomplished tonight is already remarkable." Keisha looked at Dr. Carter, then at the expectant faces in the audience. She saw Giuseppe from Le Bernardin smirking on a video call, probably telling reporters that he'd known she was delusional all along. She saw Hartwell's lawyers furiously working their phones, likely preparing damage control statements about how their client had been protecting the integrity of mathematics by exposing fraudulent claims. But worst of all, she saw the disappointment in the eyes of people who'd believed in her. The night shift workers who'd paused their jobs to watch. The single mothers who'd seen themselves in her struggle. The students who'd been told they weren't smart enough. They'd invested their hope in her impossible dream, and now she was about to let them all down. "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the microphone. "I thought I could see the solution, but if it's impossible..." Her confidence, built up through years of mathematical study and natural intuition, crumbled completely. She was just a waitress who'd been foolish enough to believe she could compete with billionaires and PhDs. The humiliation burned through her chest like acid. Hartwell sensed his moment of triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when delusion meets reality. Miss Williams has been living in a fantasy where serving coffee qualifies her to solve problems that stump the world's finest minds." The cruelty in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just about mathematics anymore. It was about putting her back in what he considered her proper place. But then, cutting through the despair, came a voice that changed everything. "Keisha." Dr. Carter's voice was quiet but firm. She moved closer, speaking directly to her rather than the cameras. "Mathematics doesn't care about classifications or committees or what's supposed to be impossible. You've seen something in this problem that others haven't. Trust your mind." Dr. Carter gestured toward the whiteboard. "Look at your work. Really look at it. You haven't been solving three separate problems. You've been building something entirely new." Keisha turned back to her equations. Through her tears of frustration, she began to see what Dr. Carter meant. Her approach hadn't been following traditional mathematical pathways. She'd been creating bridges between disciplines that weren't supposed to connect. Maybe the problem wasn't that she lacked the right technology. Maybe the problem was that everyone else had been thinking about it wrong. 2 minutes and 15 seconds remained. Could she find the courage to attempt the impossible one more time? 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Keisha wiped her eyes and turned back to the whiteboard with renewed purpose. Dr. Carter was right. She hadn't been solving three separate problems. She'd been building something that had never existed before. The infinite bridge paradox wasn't about finding a single solution. It was about creating a mathematical language that could describe infinity itself. "I see it now," she whispered, her voice growing stronger. The marker moved across the board with fluid confidence as her mathematical intuition took complete control. While Hartwell and his team had spent 3 years using quantum computers to brute force their way through calculations, Keisha had been unconsciously developing something far more elegant. She wasn't computing the solution, she was discovering it. The first bridge connected number theory to topology. Where traditional mathematics saw infinite sequences as separate entities, Keisha recognized them as points on a continuous surface. Her hand moved rapidly, sketching mathematical curves that demonstrated how infinite series could be mapped onto geometric shapes. "She's treating infinity like a landscape?" Dr. Liu from MIT whispered in amazement. "Not a mathematical concept, but a physical space you can navigate." The second bridge linked topology to convergence analysis. Here, Keisha's approach became truly revolutionary. Instead of trying to prove convergence through limit calculations, she showed how mathematical functions could flow like rivers across the topological surface she'd created. The audience was mesmerized. Even people without mathematical training could see the beauty in her visual approach. She was making the abstract concrete, the impossible tangible. But Hartwell wasn't finished. "This is mathematical poetry, not rigorous proof," he announced desperately. "She's drawing pretty pictures instead of providing numerical solutions." Keisha paused in her work and faced him directly. The moment had arrived for the first of the 3 golden beats. "Your elegant solution has one small problem, Mr. Hartwell," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "You assumed that infinity is always infinite." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Hartwell's face showed confusion, then alarm as he began to understand what she meant. "In your quantum-assisted proof, you treated all infinities as equivalent, but there are different kinds of infinity. Some are countable, others uncountable. Some converge, others diverge. The bridge you missed is that they're all connected. 90 seconds remaining." Keisha turned to complete the third and most crucial bridge, the synthesis that unified all 3 mathematical disciplines into a single, elegant framework. Her marker flew across the board, connecting equations with geometric shapes, linking abstract concepts with visual representations. She was operating on pure mathematical instinct now, her mind processing relationships that had never been formally described. The solution wasn't emerging from calculation. It was being born from intuition. "Incredible," Dr. Carter breathed. "She's created a unified field theory for infinite sequences." The 3 PhD contestants had stopped pretending to work and were simply watching in awe. Dr. Webb from Harvard was taking photographs of her work with his phone. Dr. Kowalski from Oxford was frantically scribbling notes, trying to follow her logic. 30 seconds. Keisha stepped back and surveyed her work. The entire massive whiteboard was covered with equations, diagrams, and connections that formed a coherent mathematical argument. But more than that, it was beautiful. The kind of mathematical beauty that reminded people why they'd fallen in love with numbers in the first place. "There," she said simply. "The infinite bridge paradox isn't a paradox at all. It's a map showing how different types of infinity connect to each other." The countdown timer reached 0. Silence filled Lincoln Center. Dr. Carter approached the board with her tablet, running verification algorithms against Keisha's work. The 3 PhD contestants crowded around, checking her logic step by step. The cameras captured every equation, every connection, every elegant leap of mathematical reasoning. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Carter spoke. "The mathematical reasoning is sound. Not only sound, but revolutionary. Miss Williams has created an entirely new approach to infinite series analysis." The auditorium erupted, but Hartwell wasn't ready to concede. "One professor's opinion doesn't constitute mathematical proof. I demand independent verification from multiple institutions." Dr. Carter nodded. "Of course. I've already sent Miss Williams' work to MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Cambridge, and Oxford. Their response should arrive momentarily." The tension was unbearable. 700 million people around the world held their breath as the mathematical establishment prepared to render its verdict on work created by a former waitress in less than 60 minutes. Dr. Carter's tablet chimed with incoming messages. She read the first one aloud. "MIT Mathematics Department, Williams' approach represents a paradigm shift in infinite series theory. We recommend immediate publication in the Journal of Mathematical Innovation." Another chime. "Stanford confirms the mathematical validity and notes applications to quantum field theory." Then Princeton, then Cambridge, then Oxford. Each message brought the same verdict. Keisha Williams had solved the impossible. The moment arrived for the second golden beat. Keisha faced the cameras directly, her voice calm and powerful. "The beautiful thing about mathematics is it doesn't care who you think deserves to be right." The auditorium fell completely silent. This wasn't just about solving a problem anymore. This was about truth confronting arrogance, merit defeating prejudice, brilliance refusing to be silenced by status. All eyes turned to Hartwell, the man who had built his reputation on mathematical supremacy, who had publicly wagered everything on his certainty, who had spent the evening humiliating the woman who had just proven him wrong. For 15 years, Richard Hartwell had never been defeated. For 15 years, he had been the undisputed champion of mathematical competition. But 15 years of arrogance had just met 60 minutes of pure genius. The camera zoomed in on his face as he stared at the whiteboard, understanding finally dawning. Keisha Williams hadn't just solved his impossible problem. She had revolutionized the mathematical foundation on which his entire career was built. The third golden beat was coming. The moment when arrogance would be forced to acknowledge brilliance, when prejudice would bow to truth, when the impossible would become undeniable. Would the most arrogant man in America find the courage to admit he had been defeated by the woman he had tried to destroy? The moment stretched like eternity. Hartwell stood frozen, staring at mathematical work that had just destroyed 15 years of his supremacy. But before he could speak, Dr. Carter's tablet chimed with an urgent message that would change everything once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying a mix of amazement and concern, "I've just received an extraordinary communication from the International Patent Office." The cameras swiveled toward her as she continued reading. "Miss Williams's solution methodology, it appears to have applications far beyond pure mathematics. Her unified approach to infinity analysis has immediate implications for quantum computing, artificial intelligence optimization, and cryptocurrency encryption protocols." A murmur rippled through the auditorium. This wasn't just academic mathematics anymore. The preliminary economic impact assessment suggests that companies implementing her mathematical framework could see efficiency improvements of 300 to 500% in computational processing. Hartwell's face went ashen. His entire tech empire was built on algorithms that Keisha's breakthrough had just made obsolete. "Furthermore," Dr. Carter continued, "the Patent Office is requesting immediate documentation of Miss Williams's methodology to prevent unauthorized commercial exploitation. They're estimating the potential intellectual property value at—" She paused, double-checking the figure on her screen. $200 billion. The auditorium exploded into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Camera crews were pushing forward for better angles. The 3 PhD contestants were frantically photographing the whiteboard before anyone could erase it. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. Dr. Carter raised her hand in silence. "There's one more thing. The Mathematical Consortium has just informed me that tonight's competition was partially designed as a talent identification initiative. They've been searching for mathematicians capable of breakthrough thinking that transcends traditional computational approaches." She turned to face Keisha directly. "Miss Williams, they're formally inviting you to lead a new research institute dedicated to intuitive mathematics with full funding and academic support." The twist hit everyone simultaneously. This hadn't just been a competition. It had been a recruitment process. And the woman who'd been serving coffee 12 hours ago had just become the most sought-after mathematical mind in the world. But Hartwell still hadn't spoken. The man who'd wagered everything on his mathematical supremacy now faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Would he honor his public commitment, or would his arrogance find one final way to avoid the consequences of his cruelty? The silence stretched across Lincoln Center like a held breath. 700 million people around the world waited for Richard Hartwell to speak the words that would complete the most extraordinary reversal in mathematical history. His lawyers were frantically whispering in his ear, probably advising him to find legal loopholes or claim the competition had been compromised. His associates had already begun backing away from him, sensing the shift in power dynamics. But Hartwell was staring at the whiteboard where Keisha Williams had created something that transcended his understanding. For the first time in his life, he was faced with mathematical brilliance that exceeded his own. The moment arrived for the third and final golden beat. His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I need to verify the calculations myself." The audience held its breath as he approached Keisha's work, studying each equation, each connection, each elegant leap of reasoning. Minutes passed in complete silence. Finally, he stepped back from the board. When he turned to face the cameras, 15 years of mathematical arrogance had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Miss Williams," he said quietly, "your solution is correct, completely correct. You've solved advanced mathematical proofs that I could not, demonstrating superior mathematical intuition and problem-solving ability that I failed to recognize." The words seemed to physically pain him, but he continued. "I built my career on being right about mathematics. Today I learned something more valuable than being right. I learned how to be wrong with dignity." The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. But the most powerful moment was watching Keisha's quiet grace in victory. No gloating, no revenge, just the serene confidence of someone who had proven that brilliance couldn't be silenced by prejudice. 6 months later, Dr. Keisha Williams stood in her new office at the Institute for Intuitive Mathematics, writing equations that would reshape humanity's understanding of infinity. The walls were decorated not with awards or accolades, but with pictures of students from underfunded schools whose mathematical talents she was now helping to discover. She kept one memento from that night at Lincoln Center: Hartwell's soggy napkin framed on her desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that genius often whispers in places where others refuse to listen. The final shot showed her teaching a classroom of diverse students, writing on a whiteboard with the same fluid confidence she'd shown that night. Above the board, a simple message: mathematics doesn't care about your uniform. It only cares about your courage to see what others cannot. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you work? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to Blacktail Stories for more incredible stories of people who proved the doubters wrong. Because genius isn't about where you start. It's about refusing to let anyone else define your limits. Remember, somewhere right now, the next revolutionary idea is forming in a mind that others might overlook. Make sure you're not one of the people doing the overlooking.